during World War I. However, he was never in the army. In truth, the scars on his right cheek would become just as iconic and significant as the man himself.
I remember vividly sitting on his lap one time and reaching up and feeling the scar on his face and said, "Does that boo-boo hurt?"
In 1919, the ambitious Al Capone is forced to leave New York.
Al Capone made a mistake. He beat somebody up who was of significant prominence in the New York underworld. And he was hot as a consequence. So hot that Frankie Yale shipped him off to Chicago to a guy named Johnny Torrio, who is one of the heads of one of the biggest gangs in Chicago.
For Capone, he couldn't have picked a better time to come to the Windy City. For the rapid rise of Al Capone begins at the start of Prohibition and a sudden creation of a lucrative black market.
If it weren't for Prohibition, we wouldn't be talking about Al Capone today. Nobody would have ever heard of him. He would have been a two-bit criminal. Prohibition made Al Capone. Without Prohibition, there is no Al Capone.
Outlawing alcohol was seen as, this is going to purify America. Demon liquor was poisoning the youth culture. And so the great experiment of whether they could sort of legalize morality, in essence, began.
Theoretically, dispensing liquor was illegal, but still, the public did not believe selling liquor was a bad crime.
What that means is that people drank a hell of a lot. People openly disobeyed Prohibition. They laughed at the law because the law was regarded as a joke.
Entry into a speakeasy becomes a national ritual.
They were nightclubs, and they were very successful nightclubs. It became fashionable to break the law.
When Capone got to Chicago, he was 22. And bear in mind, 22 then was not like 22 today. He's been on the streets, and he's had the bouncer's job, and he's been connected to guys back east. And you had to grow up fast back then, especially in immigrant neighborhoods with a lot of poverty and a lot of tough kids running around. So when Capone gets to Chicago and we say, oh, he's only 22, he's an old 22.
Al Capone, when he started out, was a two-bit hustler. He was working in bars, working as a bouncer. He had nothing. When Capone arrived in Chicago, he went to work at a place called Four Deuces on South Wabash. And that was a pretty typical speakeasy in its day. Everybody knew it was there. The women were upstairs.
That's my ex-doctor.
The beer was downstairs.
With no hair.
He's often a band playing in the back of the room. Capone stood out in front of this place and said, "Come on in. We got beer. We got girls." That was his first job, was just to stand out in the cold in the Chicago winter and try to get customers to come in off the streets.
Prohibition brought untold riches that those fellows never would have had with their houses of prostitution or their gambling.
There are basically two rival gangs in Chicago. Torrio is the leader of one, and Al Capone impresses him so much that within a year, he's his number 2 guy.
When an attempted gangland murder of Capone's boss, Johnny Torrio, fails, Torrio moves to Italy and cedes the entire operation to Al Capone.
Al Capone is now the sole crime boss of the city of Chicago.
While prohibition clashes rage around the country, and newspapers chronicle these wild stories of bootleggers and G-men, the gangsters become legends. With the rapid growth of radio, newsreels, and movies comes the birth of popular culture and a seemingly unquenchable public thirst for new celebrities. And Al Capone is only too happy to step into the spotlight.
In the 20s, celebrities were in demand. The newspapers wanted to build people up. Al Capone was the celebrity of crime. The people who preceded him generally tried to avoid publicity. Unlike a lot of gangsters, we like to maintain a high profile.
You have to ask yourself, how did somebody like that become so famous? For Babe Ruth, he was famous because he was on the movie reels and because he was playing in the World Series every year. Lucky Lindbergh or Amelia Earhart became famous because they were performing these astounding feats. Capone became famous because Chicago was the murder capital, and he was the most famous gangster in the world, and he gave these interviews.
He would speak to reporters at any time.
Capone had a brazen quality to the way he handled the press. He would openly brag about this politician and that politician were in his pocket. The press was feeding off of this, so that ultimately the gangster becomes this kind of intriguing, dare I say, adored figure.
The tabloids are emerging and prospering thanks to media figures like Al Capone.
The tabloids are a lot splashier than the traditional broadsheets. They're the newcomers. They're trying to get more attention.
Hollywood was also at that time ridden with scandal, and those scandals were becoming news. So you have the Fatty Arbuckle scandal, where he supposedly crushed a woman to death while he was raping her. You have Gloria Swanson running around marrying everybody.
And all of this is great for the tabloids. They love these sensational stories. They don't take themselves quite as seriously, and the gangsters are a huge source of news for these guys. The tabloids love the gangsters, and they want to make them even bigger celebrities.
You could choose Al Capone or Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein isn't going to have the magazine flying off the stands. Everybody knows Al Capone. Everybody wants to hear about Al Capone.
And Capone is a great story, and he knows it. And he's good with the media, and he knows it. Maybe the best way to explain it for people who think they shouldn't have been covering it, the New York Times was then considered the stodgiest paper in the world. And the publisher was asked, why are you covering this murder trial that was going on? And he said, well, when the tabloids publish it, it's smut. When we publish it, it's sociology. Al Capone was a dream for anyone interested in smut or in sociology.
Over time, other criminals will imitate Al Capone's quest for celebrity.
People certainly wanted to emulate him. Certainly other criminals emulated him, and certainly his legacy as a criminal is what pervades American film and popular culture now.
Al Capone did something that frankly provided a lesson to future mobsters. He became a celebrity. I mean, if you want to cite mobsters who followed in